Hi, this is Brittany Haas.
And this is Natalie Haas.
And you're listening to Bluegrass Jam Along,
a podcast for anyone and everyone who loves bluegrass.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Bluegrass Jam Along. Got another interview for you this week, and it is with Brittany and Natalie Haas, who have a fantastic new duo record out. Brittany and Natalie are sisters, as you might guess from the shared surname, and they've been playing music together all their lives, but they've just done a duo record for the first time, and it's brilliant. I love it, and so I invited them on to have a chat about it. A couple of bits of quick kind of stuff to point out. First is I've panned them to the left and right. I don't often do things with two guests, and with two guests in different locations. So I've panned Natalie to the left and Brittany to the right, and the easy way to remember is that Brittany has an R in it and Natalie has a left in it, an L in it even. So that's how you'll know which is which, in case you don't recognise their voices. And I'm in the middle, because you know what I sound like. And the other thing is there's quite a bit, as you'll find out at the end, explanation why there's quite a bit of noise in this one, just general background noise, and that is because Natalie lives by a farm in northern Spain, and so I tried to edit a bit out, but there's a lot of wildlife left in there, so bear with it. I think it will add to the overall feel, and don't let it put you off. But this was a great interview. I really enjoyed it, and it's a really, really good record. I'm going to stick a link in the show notes to their Bandcamp and all that kind of stuff, so you can go and find it, stream it, buy it, download it, all those kinds of things. But here comes my interview with Brittany and Natalie. So my guests on Bluegrass Jam Along this week are Brittany and Natalie Haas, who have been playing music together for years, but have finally got a record out as a duo, and I'm going to talk to them all about that, and I'm delighted to. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
This is the most probably geographically diverse podcast episode we've had so far. 3 people in different countries. Brittany's joining us from Nashville. Natalie's joining us from northern Spain. Should be fun. Congratulations on the record, first off.
Thank you so much.
It's really cool. I've been listening to it for a couple of weeks now, and there are so many interesting things to talk about. But before we sort of get onto the record itself, I'm just really curious to know why, after playing music together basically your whole lives, now was the time to record a duo record.
That's a great question. Britt, you want to take this?
I don't know. It's kind of funny because I feel like it happened really quickly because we had a couple gigs, very sort of far-flung gig requests at a couple festivals, and that basically prompted us. We're like, oh, maybe we should have a CD, because we'd worked up all this music and none of it was recorded. The first times that happened, where we got a gig request, we just kind of put together a bunch of old trad stuff and with new arrangements. But this time around, Natalie had all these new tunes, and so it was all original material. And we thought, you know what, we should just record this, and then we can bring it along on the tour. And then it happened. And then in hindsight, it's like, why did we not do that like 15 years ago?
And not all the music on it is mine. So Brittany has some of her own tunes on there too, but it's almost all original except for one track.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's really cool. It's such an interesting sound, and with the whole, it's a bit of a lazy term for a new acoustic, really. But with the whole sort of new acoustic world, there's such a range from kind of almost chamber style music that is very much the parts are written, it's played the same way every time, through to stuff that is, almost always entirely new every time it's played. Where does this sort of sit on that spectrum from sort of composed to improvised?
Matt?
Well, Brittany's a great improviser, so of course there was a couple moments where we had to let her go and do her thing. And she does that anyway with melodies. I think has a beautiful way of making them her own every time she plays them slightly differently. But it is, they are modern tunes, but they are mostly, like, especially my tunes, of course, are more Celtic in nature, meaning that you do kind of pretty much stick to the melody, although we are swapping melody back and forth a lot. And I would say the parts aren't like super highly developed. I think it changes with every performance. the tunes themselves are kind of set more or less, with some beautiful melodic variation from Britt and a couple of solo-y moments.
There's a cello solo. and I would say the same about Nat. I mean, I know she doesn't exactly think of herself as an improviser, but what she's doing is very mutable and it's constantly changing. And her style of creating rhythm and harmonic backup ideas is really fluid and creative and amazing. So you hear that throughout. And I think, I mean, she does this on trad tunes as well, but because you wrote these tunes, it's almost like there's a certain freedom you have with them because you made them. It's built in.
That's really interesting because one of the things, I haven't been playing traditional music for like years and years. And one of the things that was a surprise to me was how much improvisation goes on in the rhythm playing as well as in the, I sort of felt to me like you'd be getting instrumental solos and backing, but actually, particularly in a smaller ensemble as well, the accompaniment can be just as much part of the conversation as the tune.
Totally.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's the fun part about it being a duo is that, yeah, there is a lot of freedom in both parts.
And I do love that. I love a duo record or a trio record where you hear the sort of conversation happen, where when it's a band's a bit bigger, sometimes things get a bit lost or people have a role. And
exactly.
And that's particularly with this combination because maybe it's not, but to me it feels pretty rare to have two kind of melodic instruments. There's nobody playing chords. There's not a chordal instrument like in the mix, where even with something like that's quite out there, like the Edgar Meyer and Chris Thie records, you've still got one instrument that's capable of playing chords. And so it feels like some of the challenges, but also opportunities for arranging tunes for those two instruments. It's probably quite exciting.
Totally. And I would say Natalie's style, yes, it's a cello and it's bowed. It's not like she's strumming a full chord at once, but she can really create that feeling with the chopping and comping where it's sort of two notes and then another two notes really quickly. It's like she has a lot of fluidity with that kind of stuff. And I think that can create some cool contrast because then when she does take the melody, my way of backing up is a lot different. Like what the fiddle does, while it's, some similar techniques like the chopping, it's just a really different like power structure and like harmonic depth and all that. You really just hear that contrast when we trade off.
And I think the cello is a chordal instrument to some degree, like especially if I'm plucking, which I do a fair amount of. I think in this record, it's not, like you say, it's not all the notes at once, but it does give that illusion, kind of not a straight strum, but kind of rolled chords are possible on cello.
Mm-hmm.
And as a listener, and as somebody who plays like guitar and mandolin, and I have a tendency to think in chords that are just a predefined bunch of notes you choose all together. So like the chord is the choice rather than the notes. To hear accompaniment that does break that down a bit and you hear the individual notes in the chord and some of the choices going on is really cool. And it's just, I think, accompaniment in that sense. Like, I'm still fascinated to know if I know there is a bit in Scottish music, but this history of the cello as a sort of rhythm instrument, because it's not from the modern sort of acoustic bluegrass world, a very common rhythm instrument, but it's obviously got huge capabilities.
Yeah, absolutely. And it does have that history in Scotland. And then I think like Crooked Still made it a bluegrass instrument, basically, which is so cool, but yeah, I mean, it wouldn't have been doing anything like super rhythmically complex in Scotland back in the 1800s. It would have been giving a solid, just on the beat, kind of similar to like a, jazz rhythm guitar, you're just playing on the beat all the time. But it gives enough of a, I wouldn't say groove necessarily, but you're getting a steady beat that does kind of help the dancers feel the beat.
Mm-hmm.
That's really interesting because that parallel between sort of Baroque music, which features kind of a figured bass that's not dissimilar to the way some of the music is written for Scottish music,
Right.
but they use a lot of similar forms. A lot of folk dance forms were used heavily by classical composers, and presumably because the music was being written to dance to as much as to be listened to. And so there's a really interesting parallel there of how those kinds of tunes, because I know, for example, like Brittany, the Hawktail record, a lot of the tunes on that were in traditional forms. And there are a lot of, and so I guess there's a couple of bits there, but one is the way the cello works with all of that, but also, are you thinking of particular folk dance forms when you're writing these tunes? Do you have a particular sort of rhythm in mind?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Go ahead, Nat.
No, you go, Britt.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of reels. I mean, basically drawing from the Scottish dance forms mostly, although there's one of the tracks is more Irish inspired, and those are jigs. So that's also a type of dance. But as these things evolve over time, like, old time music, square dance music kind of evolving into bluegrass, then I feel like there's a bit of a parallel with Scottish music where, I mean, there's the dancing tradition is still alive and well, but there's also a performance side, which is more like what you and Alasdair do. It's like you can still dance to it, but it's also so intricate and people can just sit and listen and enjoy it that way as well. So even though they are these traditional dance forms, it might be not or I don't know. Like, it would be great if somebody put this record on and danced to the whole thing. I would love that.
Yeah. And I think something about, what you said about it being a performance tradition as well. And we are definitely a part of that. Like, we're not playing for dance. Both of us have done it a little bit, but that's not what we do mainly. So we feel, I think, more freedom in choosing tempos. Like, people who are playing for dances all the time. They're like, your reels are going to be at 120 or whatever it is. But like, there's a lot of tunes on here that would technically, fit in the reel category. It's in 4/4. It's like, it's a straight subdivision. But like, we're playing them a lot slower and groovier. And so I think, there's a little bit of our Americanness is coming out there, because we're not trying to be traditional Scottish musicians or bluegrass or old time musicians. We're just, drawing on our influences and then taking them where it feels good to us.
A lot of these tunes before we knew what we were going to call them were just, A reel, C reel, slow, Strathspey, or like they definitely come from that, and what Nat's saying is a cool concept, just the mutability of the speeds and how that can really set something up for a totally different feel.
Yeah, or like there's one Strathspey on there. Strathspeys are normally in 4/4, but this one is in 3, and it's got like a little bit in 4 in the middle of it. But like, I don't think that's not a dance form. But it's
We're playing around with it.
Come from that.
I guess if you're playing for dancing, then changing time signatures is a big no-no. But does that also give you a bit more fluidity to play around with the accompaniment and sort of where you emphasize beats and to play with subdivisions and to drag things across bar lines because nobody's waiting for the solid downbeat to kick off from? We'll be right back with you just after this. Bluegrass Jam Along is proud to be sponsored by Collings Guitars and Mandolins. If you're attending the NAMM show in January, stop by the Collings booth to say hello to the team, get hands-on with their selection of customised acoustics and electrics, and check out some exciting new prototypes they're working on for 2024. They'll also have a few of their world-class artists on hand demoing various instruments. And if you can't attend, don't forget to follow their Instagram and Facebook accounts throughout the show for photos, videos, and the latest news. Collings Guitars are hand-built from the Sound Up in Austin, Texas. This episode is also brought to you by Peghead Nation, the home of roots music instruction. If one of your 2024 resolutions is to improve as a musician, Peghead Nation is the place to go. They have 65 streaming video courses for guitar, mandolin, banjo, fiddle, dobro, bass and ukulele from some of the leading names in acoustic music. Courses cover bluegrass, old-time, Irish music and swing, plus lessons dedicated to improvisation, theory and ear training. Your first course is just $20 a month, and you can add more for $10. Try any course free for a month with the promo code JAMALONG. Make 2024 a year of more music at pegheadnation.com.
Yeah, absolutely. And even sometimes the dancers, if we were playing for dancing, I think dancers like that sometimes, that a little bit of unexpectedness, as long as you do eventually get that downbeat. But no, because we're not playing for dancing, we can do more of that, definitely.
And sort of playing as a duo with these two particular instruments, do you have to think about register more than you might do in a band setting in terms of making sure there's not too much space between you, or when there is, that's kind of a chosen thing, or did it just sort of naturally feel very similar to playing in other settings?
I think I think about register a lot in any setting, but yeah, I think the bareness of a duo does make that really important, and you can really use it to great extents because there is a pretty huge range on the cello, and as well on the fiddle, but it sounds more similar maybe across the range. Like when I'm playing on my C string, it's nothing like the depth that I can go to feels nothing like the depth that the cello can go to. And so, yeah, it's really cool to use that. Like sometimes we'll even like basically cross over, like we like to do these moments where it's, I'm playing the melody and she's playing the harmony and then we flip. But that often requires like jumping down an octave or something, like just to kind of like smooth it over. And it's very like trial and error how we figure that out. Which is really fun to be like, oh, cool. Like now, like, I think because we're sisters, the working, relationship is very fluid and like, it's like, okay, now try this, now try that. And I didn't like that. Like, it's like easy to just keep trying stuff and, explore all the options to figure out what you want to do.
And register actually is very important for me too in my chord voicing choices, and Brittany's also very vocal about telling me when she's like, oh yeah, that bass note really sticks out. I'm like playing the 5 in the bass or something, and it's just because it's a comfortable voicing, but for my left hand position. But actually, no, that makes it sound like like we're going somewhere else completely. So yeah, register when you're choosing chord voicings is hugely important because of what it does to the bass. So yeah. And especially if there's only 2 of us and I'm only playing 2 notes, like those 2 notes are hugely important where they are in the register and yeah, where they fall in the chord too.
Yeah. It's like she's a bass and a guitar player in one kind of, like the bass note and the rhythm are all happening, but you have to be, careful about the choices.
Mm-hmm. And presumably playing sort of fiddle tunes on a cello requires quite a lot of movement. You've got quite a distance to cover compared to, fiddle or a mandolin.
Yes, you can say that. I'm very thankful for having had a very good classical training, which allows me to get all over the fingerboard with relative ease.
And what are the sort of the modern, you talked a little bit about sort of Scottish music having used cellos, but what are sort of, and you talked about Crooked Still sort of introducing it as a bluegrass instrument, but what are the models for, like, where do people go to develop that approach? Presumably something like the Edgar Meyer playing on some of those records is close enough in that it's some of the similar challenges.
Yeah, and he's, often in cello range. So it's like, I feel like there's pretty much a 1-to-1 correspondence, and he's such a huge hero of mine that, I feel like the musical choices he's making that's what I want to sound like as much as possible. But when I first started, there weren't a lot of cellists doing it other than Rashad, who inspired me and, had a sound that was something I wanted to aspire to. But yeah, I guess Scotland's not the only culture. Like, I think Sweden has a pretty healthy cello scene, and Ireland more and more. And like Eastern Europe, I think it also has a really big, like Romania, of using bowed bass as a accompaniment instrument for dance music. But yeah, as far as where one goes to, figure out something that hasn't really been done before on an instrument is you just have to like copy players you like maybe of other instruments like Edgar, or like, I'll get chordal ideas from pianists and guitarists, and there wasn't a big precedent for it in Celtic music when I first started.
And it's interesting because you sort of listen to like bluegrass, and although you can do anything with the bluegrass band, and people are doing all sorts of bluegrass instrumentation these days, the instruments have a relatively defined role when you're playing traditional bluegrass, and that the bass is like essentially they function as a drum kit, with the bass as the kick drum and the mandolin as a snare drum, and and so hearing particularly duo and trio stuff, but when people have much more sort of flexibility to go where they want, and we're hearing like a bass player like Paul Coet, who will use the full range of the instrument. I find that stuff fascinating. And what you were saying about sort of register earlier, and that like naively hadn't occurred to me that you'll be playing a 5-string fiddle. And that's why those bits where my ear is listening and going, who's doing what? Where are they? Who's where? Mm-hmm. There's much more crossover than I'd imagine there being, which explains so much of the listening experience of sort of tracing the journey of the melody as it's handed over and passed back, and that conversational element which makes it so exciting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, go ahead. You go.
Well, I was just going to say that, I think, having played with Brittany, who plays a 5-string, and having played with other fiddle players who play 4 strings, like I feel like Brittany is rare in that she can actually get below me when she's playing harmonies that mean that the cello can still, stand out as it can when if I'm playing the melody and a fiddle player is playing a harmony way above me. It's like you can't tell that the cello has the melody because it doesn't have that brightness. Sorry, what were you going to say, Britt?
I guess I was just thinking about like octave. Like I basically play within like 3 octaves probably between the low C and third position on the E string. And you probably have even a wider span, right, Nat?
Yeah, I mean, comfortably, I go up to like an A on the A string down to the low C. But sometimes I'll play higher than that, but I try not to.
And your C is your C 2 octaves below mine?
I think it might just be an octave, but then your low open C, right?
Yeah.
It would be 2 octaves lower than a third finger C on the G string, I think.
Okay.
But because of the timbre of the instrument, it sounds lower, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And is there like a big difference in, because obviously there's so much opportunity now to study acoustic music in all forms, from sort of typical conservatoire, like old-fashioned hierarchical approach to this is how we learn a string instrument, all the way through to fiddle camps, but you can study American acoustic music at lots of amazing colleges now. And I might have made this up, but I don't believe you both studied music at college, did you? I think, Natalie, you studied music at college, didn't you? And I think, Brittany, you studied... You didn't,
biology.
Did you?
I did not. I minored in music, so it was part of my education there. But yeah, Nat's been to Juilliard, so kind of she's like seen the full spectrum, like because we grew up going to fiddle camps, and now she teaches that and has like co-founded a bunch of them with Alasdair, and she also taught at Berklee College of Music. So it's like you've been in the middle of the full range of that teaching spectrum, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, I did the classical thing because Berklee was kind of the only option, at least close to home when I was studying. I don't think that some of these programs that are now really strong in Europe existed yet when I was choosing colleges. So I could have gone to Berklee, but it was like far more in the jazz rock pop kind of vein than what I wanted to be doing. The roots program at Berklee didn't exist yet, so I chose Juilliard because I wanted to get better at my instrument, and I kept playing trad stuff. I was touring with Alasdair already for most of my college experience, and going to like Irish sessions in New York, and still doing the fiddle camps in the summer and stuff. So I was getting both worlds.
Were there many people doing that at Juilliard? Were there many people playing trad music alongside the sort of more traditional repertoire?
Very few. There were a couple like intrepid people, and I tried to get a session going while I was there, and got a little bit of interest, but no, it was not common at the time. And I don't know that it is still. I mean, I think they've become a little bit more open-minded, but I think that whole conservatory world takes time to make changes in it.
Yeah, and I presume it's still sort of pretty much tied to the way that kind of music's always been taught. And but my experience of just through talking to people and seeing the range of teaching that is out there for kind of folk and roots instruments now, whether it's online or at camps, or it seems much more sort of flat, and the performers and the audience all seem to be part of the same group. And if you go to a festival, the person you see on the main stage on a Saturday night is probably teaching in a little tent on the Sunday afternoon. Mm-hmm. Whereas in the classical world, it's kind of, you've got like gods and mortals almost, and you aspire to one day be a god. And it feels like the sort of acoustic music world is much more organic and much more sort of flat than that.
Mm. Yeah, I think in folk music, your mentors are much more approachable than they are in the classical music world. So did you want to say something, Britt?
Oh, just maybe that's a factor of the size of the scenes too. I don't know. I think it was so baffling, when we were young, to be like, oh, I can talk to them. Like, this is a person that I've listened to all their CDs, but they're like right over there. And like, you can just go and say, I love your fiddle playing. And they'll say, you want to sit down and play a tune? And that, I don't think that would necessarily be possible if it was less esoteric, because there'd just be more people. So I don't know, in my limited experience of the classical world, it does seem like it is fairly open-minded in some aspects. I think in younger folks and like chamber musical people, my experience is just like in Nashville, which is obviously kind of a bubble, where there's a lot of musical things meeting. And so I think there's overlap because of the sessions happening where there's like classical people in a string quartet playing with a singer or whatever, like there's maybe more blending happening here. So it feels quite open-minded.
Yeah. And I think that's true of the younger classical scene, probably in general across the board. I think it's just what I was referring to was the way it's taught in conservatories.
It's interesting though, with players like Edgar or Chris Thiele or Mike Marshall, who play like classical music, play a whole load of Bach, or Edgar will play the symphony, or this, and don't seem to make any distinction. It's all just music to be played and enjoyed and learned from and studied. And there's a lovely sort of crossover that's had that thing that's built from the 90s onwards, I guess, from things like Uncommon Ritual and some of those records, that it's this lovely space between, like we were talking about earlier on, I guess, between composed and improvised, and being space for both and all of those things in there. And it feels like there's a really sort of strong seam of that going on at the moment, with the two of you, obviously, and the Hawktail and Punch Brothers and people like Wes Corbett. And it feels like there were a lot of people operating somewhere in that sphere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a cool, exciting time to be alive.
It does feel like it's hard to know what other eras that you didn't live through feel, and it may just be that I'm particularly absorbed by this music now and wasn't 10 or 15 years ago, so it all seems exciting to me right now. But it does seem like a really rich time for acoustic instruments in general, like playing, recording, building of them. Like it's just a bit of a golden age we're in.
Totally. Yeah. It's pretty awesome.
And Brittany is like living right in the thick of it. She sees all these people all the time.
Yeah, I'm very lucky. It's inspiring.
And talking of teaching, because we were a minute ago, you both teach online, don't you? I don't know if you sort of teach sort of regularly in the sort of face-to-face fashion as well, but you've both got courses on the sort of new digital platforms. I know, Brittany, you've got a fairly new course on Artist Works, haven't you?
Yeah, that's right. Mm-hmm.
And how is that going? Because being an Artist Works student and seeing the amount of sort of work, like I'm part of Bryan Sutton's course and Michael Dave's course, and that constant churn of having to respond to students, it's a big undertaking.
Yeah, it's really cool. I mean, I still think there's no substitute for being with somebody in person, but it's the next best thing. And it's been really fun to sort of develop relationships with people over time, of just hearing them play and seeing what they're interested in working on. And it's good for me. Like, I think the skills that you get to hone when you're trying to be helpful in that way. Like, I think most of my teaching experience was at fiddle camps, because that's what I grew up going to. I did also have private instruction, but most of my like foundational folk music experiences were at fiddle camp. So in a group teaching setting, where there's a lot of focus placed on repertoire and style and not as much on technique. It's more like you just you get functional at playing, and then you can be there and you can learn all this stuff and how to do it and how to make it sound like these traditions. So then when it's like I taught like that a lot, and then to teach one-on-one where you're like looking at what somebody's doing and being like, okay, I think like if you bowed it this way, like that might feel better. It challenges me to try to figure out what's going on and how somebody can get better. And I think thinking in that way is helpful for my own approach to playing.
Yeah, it certainly seems to be one of those things that in all aspects of life, if you have absorbed something yourself, but then if you can explain it to somebody else, it sort of takes on a new depth, and sometimes you struggle to explain it to somebody else. And so having to do that really sort of beds it into your own experience.
Totally. And it's so different for everybody. Like, everybody's body is different. Everybody's tastes are different. So it's like, you don't necessarily know like what, you don't want to put too much on them. Like, I think that could be better, but like, if they like it, then that's what matters, because music is about expression. So there's not so much that's right and wrong, or those lines blur sometimes.
No, it's funny. Just on a personal level, my 10-year-old son played at a piano competition yesterday, and everybody gets a mark at the end and some feedback. And it was just it was a lovely point where one of the judges said, I can see you're all worried about making mistakes and worried about being wrong. So if you could learn to be more afraid of not communicating something than being afraid of getting it wrong, that's the way to go. And like all these kids went, oh, yeah. Oh,
wow.
Just, seeing this room of, like, if somebody said that to me, I don't think I was even playing an instrument at 10, but that's exactly the stuff you want to hear, rather than here are the rules, here's how it works, And really cool to have, like, you've got a string master's course, Natalie, and like, presumably it's one of the joys of this point in time. It's not just a golden age of playing and recording and music, but the fact this stuff is so available. If you'd tried to learn, sort of folk bluegrass roots cello 20 years ago, so good luck to you. But now there are places you can go.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that was kind of brought on by the pandemic. Everybody had a lot of time on their hands, and musicians were looking for other ways of making income, and it actually ended up working out really well for everybody. Like for the students, those who might not have the time or resources to go to fiddle camp, to all of a sudden have all of those, all of that knowledge kind of available in a hopefully affordable way, and, without ever having to leave the comfort of your own home, just means that you can still, and I think some of it, like, it's different from the courses that are, you just like film a bunch of lessons and put them up there and they're there forever. Like what Brittany's doing is great because it's back and forth. I ended up doing like a lot of Zoom workshops over the pandemic. I did like one a month, and it actually was just a great way of like keeping these communities alive. And so I'm glad that, that has kind of continued for a lot of people, schedule depending, but like, I think it's good for, we've gone back to doing fiddle camps, but for the people that can't make it there for them to have other learning opportunities is really valuable.
Yeah, I think that's one of the cool things about the last couple of years is just the idea of being able to be part of a community that you're physically nowhere near. Like just for me, I'm sitting here in London, but I regularly talk to people all over the US and elsewhere for this. And I feel like I'm connected to that world, even though, and maybe pre-pandemic I would have done, because we're just so happy to sit down and look at each other on a screen and talk in a way that before it might have been, well, let's see when we can schedule actually getting together. I've only done one interview face-to-face in 2.5 years of doing this. And that, I think that's part of just how good we are at connecting when we have to now.
Totally.
And so I'm really interested in this. Do you see this as like an ongoing project now, the duo? Because one of the glorious things about this world of acoustic music is the fluidity of, like, you come to the world of rock and people are in a band and then they might be in another band, but just the people have scheduling stuff and people have different things they want to explore, and it seems very fluid to be able to do many things at the same time. So is this something you see sort of running for the longer term?
Absolutely. I mean, why would we not?
Yeah, we've got some gigs lined up for this summer, and a few festivals down the line for next year. So we're just gonna play it by ear. I think we both have other projects, but this is always going to be there, and lots of fun and very rewarding when it does get to happen. So hopefully it'll happen more.
Yeah, it kind of feels like there's the touring part of it, and then there's the recording part of it, and they're both great. So it's sort of like you can choose which one fits, in the schedule or whatever. Like with this record, it all happened very quickly. Kind of were like, let's make a record. Like look at the calendars. Okay, we have these 5 days, like 2 days to rehearse, 3 days to record. Bam, done. And then the pre-production takes some time and all that. But just kind of knowing that like we have this very functional, like we have the abilities, and we just have to make the time to like come together, write some tunes, arrange them together. It feels very like a good pairing. Like, I mean, obviously maybe that seems like a duh kind of thing. Like we're sisters, so we get along and we like know how to work together, but feels like it works really well. And there's like plenty more territory to explore. And it's also really fun to like get together and just do a tour, because it's sort of like being on vacation, but with work. So it's like a good balance of like a way to hang out directed towards something specific.
It's basically just an excuse to see each other because we live in different places, and it's all usually music that's bringing us together. And so this gives us an extra reason to do it.
Totally.
And I guess there's none of that worry about going on tour and, will you get on the road or not? Used to being around each other by now.
It's like, even if you don't get along, we're still related.
You should put that on the t-shirts. Cool. Well, thanks so much for doing this. I've really enjoyed this chat, and I'm really excited to see how the record does, because I've been really enjoying it for the past couple of weeks, and I'm excited for everybody to get to hear it. I think by the time this interview goes out, the record will be out.
Awesome.
All right.
Thank you so much for having us, Matt. This was great.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Cool. That's us.
Okay.
There's a lot of wildlife going on in the background, but I think I might just leave it in.
I'm so sorry.
Was that
I lived
the dog was
to...
there?
There's a dog, there's a rooster, there's
sheep. I'm so sorry.
It's all right. I'll tell people at the beginning and say there's some sort of prize for the person who can identify the most animals in this space of the interview.
I'm so sorry.
I don't know. I think it all adds to the charm. Bluegrass Jam Along is proud to be sponsored by Collings Guitars and Mandolins, making some of the finest guitars and mandolins in the world since the 1970s. Visit collingsguitars.com and find out why.